So, welcome, Christy Marie and Rebecca. I'm super excited to be moderating this session on the father's role in diversity, equity, and inclusion. This just to say, it's 11 p.m. here, so you two are going to have to hold this thing up if I start flaking. So I'm normally in bed by now. But it's absolutely wonderful to have you here. I'm going to give a brief description on who I am and what I do, and it would be great if you could introduce yourselves and what you do and your passion, and then we'll deep dive into our topic on fathers. My name is Joanne Penny. I'm an anti-racism, equality and diversity expert. I'm also the CEO and founder of Amplify Your Voice, which is a consultancy that works with modern and progressive companies who are authentically on their journey to ensure equity in the workplace, particularly in the workplace. I have a particular focus on supporting Black and ethnically diverse individuals and women. And I do a lot of mentoring and coaching and educating at C-suite leadership team level. So that's a brief synopsis on who I am and what I do. And I'm delighted to welcome you, Christy Marie. Christy Marie is an attorney and a community relations counsel. I will let you tell our audience exactly who you are and what you do, but also to welcome Rebecca Muse, thank you, who has spent 15 years committed to public services and community engagement. And I'd love you to talk about your recent launch, Rebecca, about educating kids. So if I can just go to Christy Marie, if you'd like to just go for it. And before we do that, actually, it was just important to say that this is a informal discussion. You know, it's about helping people, and it's a bit like Clubhouse with a video. So not too formal, not too structured, but hoping to give some real good practical insights and tools to any dads that may be listening. Just feel free to engage in the chat. If you have any questions for the three of us, then please do. I'll be checking the chat periodically, and we can address any of your issues, questions, concerns, etc. So, Christy Marie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So my name is Christy Marie Shipley. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. And then I moved to Florida for college. I went to the University of Florida and then Iowa for law school. Iowa, just in the middle of nowhere in the United States. And I have stayed in Iowa. One of the benefits of being in Iowa is that I am unique. One of the setbacks of being in Iowa is that there's not a lot of people that look like me. So the idea of diversifying the legal profession I'm very passionate about that. And that has led me to work with a lot of different groups and a lot of different people that are seeing the value in diversity and inclusion, and most importantly, inclusion, and how to make the environment welcoming so more students of color want to come to Iowa or stay in Iowa if they're already from here. So I'm hoping to share some of the ways that we're trying to expand the diversity in the legal profession with you, and discuss how that may apply to fathers as role models.
Yeah, great. Sorry, I think that was my signal. I might have lost you there for a moment. But thankfully, we've had our intro, so I know exactly who you are and what you do. So thank you so much for that. And Rebecca, it would be great if you could let us know who you are, what you do, your passion, what you're interested in. And yeah, I'm particularly interested to hear about your project on claiming your crown for 8 to 12-year-olds. So please be my guest.
Thank you. I am Rebecca Muse. I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is the nation's capital in the United States. I spent, like you said, 15 years in public service. That's what I do during the day. But my passion is educating young children, ages 8 to 12, specifically girls of color, on the importance of Black history, cultural education, as well as legislative consciousness. I spend a lot of time making sure that young girls understand their rights. I'm not a lawyer like Christy Marie, but I have spent so much time working on the Hill in my day job that I have learned that children of color, oftentimes we learn about the systems and the legal systems when we become a part of it, unfortunately. And I'm trying to help to change that narrative so that we understand that, we don't have to be a part of the system to understand it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. So we've got 55 minutes. We're going to cover a few areas, but essentially this discussion is about, as fathers, what can you do to help your kids and your children with representation? And how you ensure that they are also authentically treating their peers with equality and diversity, and really having that fundamentally in their lives. So for me, the father as a part of that family structure, as a role model. No kids are born with racism. No kids are born knowing anything different. So as parents, as fathers, we have a fundamental reason to demonstrate to our kids and to continually educate ourselves about why equality matters, and really role modeling the behaviors and cultures that we want our children to have and how we want our children to treat people. So what would you say, both of you could just go for it, about what the importance of the father's role in this journey?
So, like you mentioned, fathers are so important to the family structure. And, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's just simply the presence of differences. And the one thing we know about being parents, even if you're not a parent, is everyone is different. And when you have a family structure, it's really important how you pose things to young people. When a young person is questioning or being curious, as a father, as a parent, it's very important that you kind of shape the way that they're saying that. If they say, well, hey, well, why does that person look like that? Well, why do I look like this? What makes you special? What makes you different? That's the same thing for them. Why do they sound like that? Well, that's called an accent. In this region of the world, this is how people speak. And you can then teach them about that region. It's so important at a young age that we shape our children to embrace differences, because when they go out into the workplace, it's not so jarring, and they haven't already created all these biases against people that they have never met. But instead, that they embrace the cultures that they meet, and they say, everyone isn't going to look like me. I come from a unique environment where I grew up in Washington, D.C. during the era where it was called the Chocolate City. It was over 80% African American. I also went to a historically Black college and university. But I understand that most of the country in which I live in, that's not the reality. And my parents taught me that early on. So then when I began to travel to other states, I wasn't so shocked, or I wasn't so biased against other people. And as a father, it's very important that you bring that role into your household very early for young people.
I think one of the things that we often take for granted is the fact that we all have biases, right? They say that children as early as 18 months old can already tell who is part of their out group. So basically who's not like them, just from the body language of the parents, that they may not even realize that they're tensing up when they're interacting with someone that's a different race, a different color, a different religion. But children start feeling that early. So the idea is, as a parent, one of the things that we need to do is be extra aware of those unconscious biases, so we can support our children as they try to fight those biases that are natural. Just like you see a snake, and the first thing that you think about is recoil. It's years and years of built defenses that we are going to want to be with people that are like us, that we have similar characteristics, that we feel community with. One of my biases, I'll tell you, I am from Puerto Rico. I like Puerto Ricans better than Spanish-speaking people from any other country? Well, first and foremost, because they don't make fun of my accent, because they have the same accent. So that's an example of just an inherent bias that I will always prefer Puerto Rican acquaintances over Cuban acquaintances, because we may have a cultural experience in common. But as a parent, I need to get over that. And when I'm making community and I am modeling community for my sons, one of the things that I need to do is think about, how am I interacting with others, setting the example for that positive interaction with out groups or with people from people that are not like me. So that's one of the things that I think that DEI is really trying to embrace and bring to the forefront, is the idea that we have to recognize that there are other people, like we've mentioned before, there's diversity, there's people of every color, of every shape, of every language, speakers, etc. So that's the diversity. Then we need to talk about equity, making sure that these individuals have the same opportunities that we have. And then inclusion, making sure that these individuals are welcome in the same places that we are welcome in, that we are all having not only equal access, but equal invitation to actually participate. And I think that that's where parents modeling that behavior outside of the structures that may be in place, that may have systemic racism, et cetera, are going to teach the children how to properly take advantage of these institutions.
I think you've hit on a really important point there, and it's actually, as parents, as fathers, it's really understanding the fundamental differences between those terms, and they're often used interchangeably and they're often lumped together, but actually having a really clear understanding of what diversity is, what equity is, what equality is, and what inclusion is, helps you with the nuances in the conversation that you need to have with your children, because it's not just one generic term. There's so many different nuances that we're going to have to teach and educate our children. And I think as parents, we need to equip ourselves, and we need to have a toolkit to be able to teach our children. And part of that journey, is that initial journey, is really recognizing and understanding those essential fundamental terms from the get-go. And like you and I discussed, Christy, it's a continual educational journey. Even as the three of us in this space, being experts, I'm still learning every single day. We educate ourselves every single day. We have a responsibility to our children to keep up to date with all the advances, and whether that be technology, physically, but in terms of diversity and equity and equality, it is not a standalone, a standstill issue. It is an evolving issue, and we are going to consistently learn so that we can role model those behaviours and those cultures for our children. But I mean, one of the things probably, if there's fathers listening to this, other parents listening to this, they'll say, okay, so we recognise we all have biases. Okay, we recognise that we need to role model and teach our children, and we want them to, treat everyone fairly. But how do we do this? How do we get the tools to actually, how do we equip ourselves to deal with this in an ever-changing environment, an ever-changing world, and also not have the fear of getting that wrong? Because quite often I think as parents, and just generally, people do have a fear of, particularly when it comes to language, of, what language they should use, what is the correct language to use. So what they do instead is that they internalize, they silo, they don't use the language. And, we talked about this, Christy, about, almost reverse mentoring, where we're actually learning from our kids as well, because they're the generation that are really coming up and knowing about all these terms and, ideas as well. So I'd be interested to know what you both think about that.
So one of the things that I was very surprised about, as adults, we think we know a little bit more than the children. I always think about Peppa Pig and how Daddy Pig is always saying, you know, like, oh, this is not going to happen to me because I'm an adult. And then he ends up in whatever predicament she's anticipating. One of the things that I found interesting and at the same time eye-opening has been that idea of reverse mentoring. I was talking to an African-American, and we'll get into that term in a second, to an African-American gentleman that he was telling me, I have always identified as African-American. And then my daughter came home one day from school and she tells me, stop saying African-American, we're going to say Black American from now on. And he was like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. And one of the things that she was saying was, I have classmates that are actually African-American. They are from Africa and they are naturalized citizens. So now they're American and their experience is very different from our experience. They know what country their ancestors came from. We, because of the fact of slavery and that we were stolen from our land, we don't know where we came from. So the right way for us to identify that common experience is to say that we are Black Americans, not African Americans, because an African American is Barack Obama, somebody who's half Black, half African, half American. And he's grappling with this situation of how has my daughter just upended years of identity and what does this mean? And we get into this conversation about how race is a social construct and it's actually meant to talk about your shared experiences as a community. And I'm like, oh, it sounds like she's right. And he's like, well, no, my identity is my identity. I'm going to continue saying that I'm African American. But it's that idea. As a father, what I would tell him is, at least you were open to listen to what she had to say. You had a discussion with her as to where these differences may come from. And I don't know if it was a good idea to kind of like settle down in your hunches and refuse to make a change, but it's great the fact that you're having these conversations. But how do you move forward from there when your daughter has an identity that's different from yours? And is it really different? So it's the tools of having that conversation, of being open, of listening. Those are going to be universal and are going to help you with any parenting problem that you may have. But it's the added layer of using validating language, of understanding that there's a difference between race and culture, and how those names come about may help you have these conversations as your children are discovering what the rest of the world refers to the same things that they've lived with and why those terms may be different.
Yeah. I think that's such an interesting point, because I think, regardless of this topic that we're talking about, a lot of parents find it hard to take advice from their children because they feel like they're then losing their power, right? So they don't, it's that sort of archaic sort of, you don't tell me, I'm the parent, I tell you. But, in this space, actually, as you were saying, we also need to allow our children to educate us, because they are on the ground and they are learning. And like you said, that girl's in school, and that's how she's identifying as well. So as a parent, it's critical that you actually listen to your children as well and listen to their educational journey. And I think, if you have that humility, you can have more honest and open conversations, and you're not creating that sort of fear of reprisal in your child. So they will feel more able to communicate with you on any level, but particularly with uncomfortable or difficult conversations like this one, because they are often uncomfortable conversations, or they've been in uncomfortable scenarios or situations at school, dealing with their peers. And you want to have that open, honest approach where they can come home and say, Mum, Dad, parent, this is what's happened, and how do we talk about this? And I know from talking to a cross section of people from diverse backgrounds, but particularly from Black and ethnically diverse backgrounds, often we felt like we couldn't have those conversations when we were kids because maybe there was too much trauma, maybe it was too difficult, it was too difficult for parents. But I think we need to actually 2021 have that humility and be able to foster that environment where our children feel they can come and talk to us about this very difficult situation. And our children now, they have social media and the mass media, so it's not like when I was growing up and it was just a newspaper and you could hide a newspaper. They're going to know about George Floyd. They're going to know about the riots. They're going to know about what's happening in all different countries globally. So there's nowhere to hide really in this conversation. I think that's probably one thing I would say to parents that are listening. There is nowhere to hide. You're going to have to face this, head on. But the best thing you could do is have that education yourself so that you are confident, you are equipped, you've got your toolkit, and you're equipped to have those conversations and navigate them with your children and help them navigate their journey at the same time. So I've been talking a lot. Rebecca, you've been quiet, but I'm sure you've got lots to say on this subject as well. Would you like to come in now?
Absolutely. One of the things I find important is I learned with my daughters. I have 2 daughters, and I also the young girls that I mentor. I make sure that when we're reading books and when we're learning about these different things, I'm reading those books with them because the world is ever changing. And young people do, like you said, they have social media, they know so much. We also sometimes tend to, as a Black American, as an African American, or whatever you choose to identify with, there's a lot of assumptions. The assumption that we don't know our history. Some of us absolutely know what part of Africa our descendants come from. We've done that research and we do know, and we do identify with the continent. There are some of us who do not because that history was stripped from us and we don't have that information. So when I'm speaking with young people, I encourage them to let's go and find the information because it's out there. If you want to identify as an African American, there are certain tools you can do to find out ancestrally where your people identify with and come from in modern day Africa. We have that information. We can find it. And we've done that. I've done that with young people, and it has really helped shape them on just saying, you know what? I'm not going to let people tell me who I am. I'm not going to let people assume that I have no information on my background. I'm going to find that information and then I'm going to present myself to the world based on that knowledge. And I pretty much operate that way. And I feel like if parents had those tools to say, you know what, I'm going to humble myself and learn with my young people because I don't know everything and I will never know everything. But what I will be able to do is sit down with you and learn this together. So, that's one of the things I do with my daughter. We just recently read a book, Anti-Racist, and it was about a 5th grade level book, but I sat and I read it with her and we talked about it. And then we included her school and said, you know what, let's get the whole 5th grade class in on this if it's okay with their parents. Because I understand the influence that your peers have on you is very strong. And I want to make sure that what you're being presented with at your level from your peers is something that you all are actually getting accurate information on. So oftentimes I seek the information with them.
Is this part of your claim your crown? The project you launched. It sounds amazing. That's about educating specifically 8 to 12-year-olds on cultural history and their background. So how does that feed in, and how can fathers and parents listening to this use that or your project or your tools to help them with this narrative?
Well, the goal of it is just so that by the time these young people get to high school, they have some sense of understanding. They're not getting to high school and college and seeking things that they could have gotten at a younger age. Growing up in America, the George Floyd situation went global, right? But this is the trauma that Black Americans deal with every day. I'm no scientist, I'm no doctor, but we feel like we have PTSD sometimes. It's constant trauma. And a lot of it is because we just have no outlet. We don't have the tools. No one has taught them to us. So that's really my goal. My goal is just to teach young people how to understand their cultural history and to be proud of it, to be proud of who you are. and not just constantly let all these outside influences of negativity make you feel like, you're less than, because you're not.
I mean, it's about giving them a shield as well, and giving them that confidence, so they do have that shield to, like you said, to go in and go in on that journey. But I also think, as a, somewhat for me, someone who's going in and doing a lot of education and training, like I said, at a leadership team level, I can see there's a disconnect often between the theoretical, the educational piece, and actually putting that into practice when it comes to practical everyday living. Like you said, we're living with a lot of trauma, but everyday microaggressions, or our children are going through things every single day that accumulate over time. So one of the things that I try and do as a parent, I have 3 boys, and 2 are grown up and they've gone off now, so they're well educated. But my 9-year-old, I often talk to him, not, oh, we're going to sit down and talk about racism, or we're going to sit down and do this. I often talk about to him on it every day, like, oh, did you see that? That's what happened. Or did you see that advert? Or what do you think that meant? And then have those sort of discussions, get him to talk to me about his opinion and what he thinks. And so that's, and then you can apply the principles and say, well, this is not okay because you're excluding someone, or this person doesn't feel included. And it's really sort of communicating that educational, theoretical piece and enabling your children to put it into practice on a very, very practical level on an everyday basis, I think is absolutely fundamental. And it's something as adults that we find difficult. So, if we can instill that in our children from an early age, like, we are doing them a massive, massive service, massive credit, that we're going to give them those tools to actually be able to make that translation. Christy Marie, you look like you want to come in there.
I needed to unmute myself. Yes, I think that one of the things that we take for granted is that children know. And a lot of times it's about teaching them the right vocabulary so they can retain power over their own identity. One of the things that children are very resilient, and they're very open and willing to learn. And one of the things that my own child asked me is like, why am I brown and you are beige and daddy is dark brown? And I was like, the first thing that shocked me is he is speaking factually. He is looking at our skin tones and speaking factually. He's not calling his dad black. He's calling his dad dark brown because that is the color of his dad's skin. He's not looking at, this question comes from a genuine place of curiosity. This is not a question that's tainted by somebody telling him something. So we talked about the differences in skin color, and I told him, like, if you put a little bit of mommy and a little bit of daddy, like, you're what comes out, and we talked about all that good stuff. And then we talked about his beautiful skin, and we talk about his beautiful curly hair, and we talk about the positive things about who he is. And I asked him, who do you love most in the entire world? And if he doesn't say myself, we go back and we keep asking. So it's teaching them that vocabulary so they have already positive affirmations associated with who they are. I was reading a story about a woman who adopted a child from Africa, and she was Caucasian. And of course, she got similar questions about the skin color differences. So her Caucasian mother had been reaffirming her, like, you have beautiful skin like chocolate, and which there's some problematic issues with that comparison. But she had consistently told this to her daughter. So when she goes to a private school that's segregated, and one of her peers tells her, your skin is brown like poo, she responds, no, I am beautiful. My skin is brown like chocolate. But that comes from from the family, from the home. You know, with my child, I think we had a similar, not a severe situation, where I consistently tell him, your curly hair is beautiful. Your curly hair is beautiful. Everybody wants your curls. You know, I'll pull on his hair and be like, look how it springs back. It's beautiful. Yeah. And then when he goes to school and somebody tells him, why don't you ever brush your hair? His answer is like, what do you mean? My hair is beautiful. And and that was it. It's like, it was almost an attitude of, you don't understand the world because you are not seeing how beautiful my hair is, you know? And that's one of the things that we need to start at home, is providing them the right vocabulary, not just about their own identities, but also about other people. So they are equipped with these positive affirmations and positive impressions of themselves and of others, so that when somebody else comes with a negative connotation towards whatever identity differences may be being pointed out, they can be like, no, my hair is beautiful. No, my skin is beautiful. I'm not going to let your negativity come cloud my, come crap my style. That's not going to happen. So I think that that's something else that we can do every single day, and like you said, as we see people walking around, isn't that red hair beautiful? Isn't that, yellow hair, blonde hair beautiful? And just showing them that there's no competition, that everybody can have.
There's beauty in differences, whether that be what you look like aesthetically, whether that's your sexuality, whether, what it is being, like you said, having those positive affirmations, every day with your children, talking about it as, and you might use that positive language that they do feel confident. Just as you were talking, I was thinking, I felt like my parents, they made us feel that we were, beautiful and, lovely regardless of our skin color. But one thing I've definitely struggled with throughout my life is how to call out negative behavior and call out inappropriate behavior. And I still struggle with it. So I still struggle, and often like something will happen and then I will go back and I will think, oh, I just was so uncomfortable with that, but I didn't say anything. Not so long ago, I was in a professional environment, and the most senior person in the organization, in front of a whole committee of really senior leaders, touched my hair and was like, oh, you've had your hair cut, and oh, it feels so lovely, Joe. And I didn't say anything. I recoiled and I was shocked and I felt sick, but I didn't say anything. And as a grown woman in a professional environment, I was so angry with myself that I didn't actually call out that behavior. And I wonder how, and I know why I didn't, because it was fear of, I was shocked for a start. And then again, it's the fear of the repercussions. And then you're dealing with more senior people than you. So all these things are running through your head while you're trying to process at the same time. So I'm just wondering, for our children, how do we equip them? What tools can we give them to be able to do that in a way that is not perceived as, it's not going to come down on them negatively? I think Christy Marie, we talked about this, didn't we, about disrupting, some power structures, and you had some really great, interesting examples of how you can do that. And even from our conversation, I learned a few things. I was like, oh yeah, you don't have to say, oh, you're a racist, but you can say things. So yeah, I'd be really interested to know from both of you how you think we can teach our children how to call out inappropriate or discriminatory behavior.
Well, it's very important for me that I create a safe space for my daughters. My daughters understand that I will advocate and protect them, that they will stand up for themselves. And I also model their own behavior. Early on in my career, I had something very devastating happen to me in a meeting full of my peers and even senior leaders, where my manager had, I don't know, she stumped her toe or something. And she looked at me and said it was the color of Rebecca's skin. In that moment, I was mortified. I didn't stand up for myself. And I was a grown woman. And
this is what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I came home and I shared that experience with my husband, and he empowered me to go back to her and to say something. And I did. And she immediately started crying. And in that moment, I was confused. I was like, you did that to me. You know, you created this. And it just helped me to understand that this is something I can't allow my daughters can't be my age before they're willing to speak up about this.
Yeah, so absolutely.
I always tell them, and I always empower them with, you have a voice. If it feels wrong, it is wrong. Trust yourself. And as your mother, I will advocate for you and I will stand with you. You don't have to do this alone. So my girls are very, my girls are of dark skin like me. They have curly hair. And my daughters, I'll share with you, they are in the sports world that they are in. They are the majority. They're not, most people do not look like them. And they've had people come to them and do the same thing, touch their hair and all those things. And I tell them to immediately tell them, no, you are uncomfortable. It is rude to touch my hair. You may ask me a question, but you may not touch me. So just empowering them very young. And if there's a problem, my mother is here. And my daughters are very comfortable, but they're learning at very young ages that you can speak up for yourself in a respectful way. And you can set boundaries, because boundaries are very important. And I didn't do that for myself. In the moment I shrunk and I was an adult. So
I don't think we were taught to do that. I don't remember being taught at all. I think I remember being told not to talk about things that came up that were, to do with the color of my skin, actually, or not to make a scene, or to not come across aggressive, or to, I just think it's such a crucial fundamental skill that we can teach our kids, because it's something that I still struggle with. And that still, as we know, as Black women, we will still be encountering daily microaggressions, daily things that have happened to us, and the tears. And when you do pull someone, and the thing is, when I have had the confidence to then pull someone up or call someone's behavior out, then you're presented with the type of behavior you just talked about, Rebecca. Then you get the tears and the defensiveness and the lack of humility. And then the script is totally flipped on you as a person. Like, you've then brought this negativity. So I'd be really interested to hear, more from you guys about how to disrupt those power structures. And I'm going to be listening intently so that I can learn as well.
So Rebecca, just a quick question. When this person that's technically in a position of power, because she's your supervisor, right? Did I understand that correctly? When she starts crying, did you think, why are you crying? Well, I know that I would have thought the same thing. Why are you crying? You did something to me. But how did you respond? Like, what did you actually verbalize at that moment?
Well, I did actually crying because I didn't understand.
Okay.
And she told me, because she said something to the effect of, well, because I would never say anything racist. And I said, I never said you did. I never said you did. What I explained to you was, by referring to your wound or whatever happened to you, I'm not even sure really what happened to her, as the color of my skin. That was one. Yes, it was very racist for you to do that. And then you did it in a public forum, which then made me humiliated, because you equated the color of my beautiful skin to your injury. And as I began to explain to her, her tears started to dry up. And I explained to her, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to educate you, because in this work environment, if you do that to someone else, they may not take it the way I did and come to you the way I did. They're going to go to EEO. And then and no one's going to learn in that situation. I'm trying to get you to learn. And she did. I also think that a lot of that was learned behavior from her. She was from a different region of the country than I am. And things like this are just norms. And you sometimes have to look at, people have norms that they're just not willing to break sometimes until someone interrupts it. And in that moment, I was willing to interrupt her.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about earlier was about the idea of microaggressions, and how those are usually, what makes them micro is the fact that they're an everyday insult, indignity, or demeaning message sent to historically marginalized group by well-intentioned members of the majority group. So that's the thing, like it's that whole idea of they didn't have the intent to be hurtful, which is what makes managing that type of situation so hard. Because like in the case of your supervisor, she didn't mean anything by it, but it does not negate the fact that what she said was in fact based on a bias and was in fact very much hurtful. So one of the things that we struggle with when talking about this is that we don't have the tools. This kind of looks small, doesn't it? Give me one quick second.
Most of them I can read, but there's only one I couldn't, yeah.
Yeah, let me see if I can make this a little bigger. So the idea is that we often talk about these things that we experience and how wrong these things that we experience are, but then we often don't talk about, okay, so what am I supposed to do when it does happen? Because it is unfortunately very likely to happen. So this is something that I've shared with my my team at work. It's the idea that you have something that you can do. You just have to pay attention to what's going on. Make sure. Okay. All right, so we're going to try to get this a little bigger. So it's like, now that I know what microaggressions are and when that happens, what do I do? So first, we want to talk about when you're in the receiving end. So you're in the receiving end, this person has offended you. And that's one of the problems with microaggressions, is the fact that because they are subtle, the first thing that you experience is a sense of confusion of, am I meant to be offended? Was this offensive? Like, she just let that coming out so swiftly. maybe I have no right to be offended because she didn't mean it. And that's, I have a colleague that was talking about, he's gay, and he went for a job interview at a law firm, and the law firm assistant tells him, "Oh, I'm so excited that you're going to start here because I need someone to watch my Broadway musicals with." And
oh my God. Oh my God.
And he's going in for an interview. So what this person has just experienced is a microaggression. But not only that, they're about to go into an interview and they have been thrown off kilter. They feel invalidated. They feel like they've been stereotyped. They feel like there's so many assumptions that have been made about him already walking into the situation that he has to spend extra energy to dispel. So that's one of the things that we talk about when we talk about microaggressions, is that sense of uncenteredness that it leaves you with. And it triggers this generational trauma that we have from being underrepresented and from experience this consistently every single day. So of course, the first thing that we have to assume to be able to respond in a positive way, because sometimes people are meaning to offend you and there's little you can do about that. But to respond in a positive way, the first thing we need to do is assume, for exercise purposes, that there's no ill intent. Second, ask a follow-up question. Who are you referring to when you say that? Or what do you mean? Think about, in the situation of my gay friend that goes to this job interview, if he would have asked her, "What do you mean by that?" The secretary would have had to verbalize, "Well, I am assuming that you like Broadway musicals because you're gay." And that would have allowed her to catch the error of her ways. Then you can be clear, I'm concerned about the assumption that you just made. You can explain how that can be a slight this is a way that you kind of maintain the power dynamics if it's a situation where you have that hierarchy between you. Like Rebecca said, she said, "You said it to me, but if you had said it to somebody else, you would have ended up at EEO." So it's that idea of explaining, I'm willing to have this conversation with you, but somebody else may not. So that's providing an opportunity to let the other person know I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, and we're having an equal conversation. And also identify individuals of trust that may help you process the situation that you just went through, because it is a big deal that you've just suffered this slight. So in my friend's case, he went and talked to one of his mentors, and it's like, how am I supposed to deal with this? Is it worth pursuing? Should I say something? And have that debrief. Now, if you're on the other side of the coin, if you're the one that has been told what you just said was hurtful and inappropriate, you have to listen. That is the first thing, is listen, try to understand, and don't try to displace blame. Sometimes as a person in an interracial relationship, I've gone to my mother with these same conversations. I understand you didn't mean anything by this. However, that was inappropriate. And any type of defense on her part is seen as dismissive. And that's important, that you are not dismissive when somebody is confronting you, because it's taking a lot from them to actually bring this concern up to you. If you're receiving this concern, acknowledge their experience, explain that it was unintended. And once again, this is handling microaggressions. If you intended to be offensive, we're in a different world, and that's a different problem. Apologize, but make sure that you're not making it about you and about you receiving forgiveness. And then try to move forward with an eye to not repeating that same behavior again, which is always challenging, because once again, these are biases that we have ingrained and that we have to interrupt, that we have to take a second to think about before we speak. So that's the tools that I've provided my team, and when I give presentations, to double think about things before speaking or when receiving feedback.
That was that's really good, Christy Marie. And one of the things I do, just bring it to our young people, is very simple things, like my daughter's names. My daughter has 2 first names, 11 letters, and it doesn't contain the letter A, which is very rare. So that probably tells you that it's a pretty difficult name. But I encourage her to correct people. These are little things that I can teach them very young, that teaches them, by the time they get to, the office area where they have these microaggressions and they have to confront these things, they're prepared to speak up. Even small things, like if they're asking a question about dinner and they're not being clear, I say, use your voice. And I do these little things just to build them up and give them those tools early. Always use your voice. I can't hear you. I don't understand you. So that when they get into the office space and people are presenting them with this, they won't be as afraid as I was to speak up. They'll be used to using their voice and correcting people when they say that difficult name, because it's okay, it's your name. So those are the small things that I do with my young girls at a very young age, to try to, hopefully by the time they're my age, they're not shrinking when people bring these things to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fundamental to equip our children with that toolkit, and all those things are learned behavior. So instilling it from a very young age is definitely going to give them the confidence to be able to handle situations, because it is very difficult. Because often you can, Christy Marie, you can go through that textbook, and you still, we'll have people coming back, and Rebecca, even when you do use your voice and say that's not okay or that's not appropriate, they will come back again and again, being defensive and saying, oh, well, I thought this, I thought you'd be that, I thought you'd be happy to identify as this. And, it does take a lot of confidence and energy to deal with what we're dealing with at the moment, because we understand that systemic racism is moving at a glacial pace. The progression is very, very slow. So, I think, for all the parents that are listening out there, for all the dads that are listening out there, it is, really taking these practical tools, really putting them into practice, and trying to do that on a daily basis. And as we said, having that educational piece, having that sit down and reading piece, and also trying to apply that and apply those principles in their daily lives and daily scenarios and situations that they might encounter or might be in. The great part of having those positive affirmations and knowing that they are great regardless of the color of their skin or the curliness of their hair, or their names, because I think, historically, particularly, Rebecca, when someone's had a difficult name in the UK, they used to call you something else. They'd be like, "Oh, we're not gonna call you like my mum's name is Merle, which isn't even that difficult. She's from the Caribbean." They used to go, "No, we're not going to call you Merle. We're going to call you something else, Pearl. That's easier for us," And she's kind of lived with that for a very, very, very long time. So you're right, teaching your daughters, no, it is really about having that voice, isn't it? And it's about having that confident voice, even when you are put down time and time again, or the defensiveness comes in, or the justification comes in, or the gaslighting comes in, that you can continue to use that voice and continue to hold yourself up and say, actually, it's not okay. It's really, really not okay. We're getting close to the end of the session now, so I'm just thinking about any other gems or things that we can help, because I'm not sure that anyone's on this chat, but it will definitely be recorded and put on YouTube, so we don't know who's going to be tapping in and listening. So anything that we sort of final comments that we want to impart to any listeners who might really be needing some advice and expertise from the three of us. Is there anything you think we've missed? I suppose one thing before I let you speak. One thing was we talked a lot about race, and we've touched a little bit on LGBTQ+. But when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and equality, is it all about race, or is it about other marginalised groups? What would you say to that?
I have the answer.
Yes, go for it.
I know. So one of the things that I love to share with any group talking about diversity is this will of power or will of privilege.
This is right.
We often get when we think about diversity, we have kind of one-track mind, because sometimes the area of most need is racial or ethnic diversity. We kind of go to that. Is the most visible area of diversity. So we forget about all these other not little, but they're pretty big deal, areas where power is not equally distributed. From gender, citizenship, skin color, the type of education that you have, ability. I am neurodiverse, and the more I learn about my condition, the more I realize how it impacts everything that I do, and how the world is just not set up for individuals that are neurodivergent. So it just lets you know how the closer to neurotypical you are, the more power you have, not because you have an edge, but because you don't have a hindrance, because the world was built with you as the default. So everybody else has to work a little bit harder to kind of get the world to work for them. And I think when I think about every slice of that wheel of power, I think about body size. Think about planes. Planes have narrow seats, and now they're claiming that if you're overweight, over a certain weight, you have to buy 2 tickets. And there's this great story about this young lady that was told, you cannot board the plane, you have to buy 2 tickets. And then someone comes in late trying to get on the flight, and they're like, okay, you can go ahead and just get the 1 ticket, because they found somebody else to sell it to. So it's this idea that, once again, if you're slim, that type of situation wouldn't have even happened to you.
Of course, yeah.
But that's where that wedge comes in. Wealth, language, everything. There's a variety of situations where you can be. I am in the middle of power when it comes to citizenship and when it comes to being heterosexual. So I have power. I can assume that the world is built and organized for citizens and for heterosexual people.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of other areas of that wheel where I don't have the power and I have to adjust the world to fit me. So that's something to keep in mind when we're thinking about diversity and making space for other people.
Yeah, there's so many nuances in the conversation that we have to be really, again, it's the educational piece and educating ourselves on all these different spectrums of power and, you know, the hierarchical structure that we're dealing with in society. And yeah, it's just not an easy route. And we haven't even touched on intersectionality, you know, and what that means if you're a Black, gay, plus size woman, you know, it's crazy. And you know, I think, yeah, just as we were going back to you know, the original part of our conversation about teaching our children that they're all normal, you know, that's all okay. There's, you know, if you experience people, you know, with all their differences, that you treat them exactly the same. But there's also recognizing and having the education on the differences within that power structure. And I think this power wheel is amazing. It's just so visual and accessible and just so easy for anyone to see. Yeah, okay, I've got power here, there, you know. It's. I think I'm going to definitely use that in the future. So thank you for that. And Rebecca, any final thoughts? Thank you, Christy Marie. Any final thoughts on any gems that you feel like you want to share before we hit our last 4 minutes?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, Christy Marie, I love that wheel too. I took a look at it yesterday. But I think my final thing for parents that I would say is just continue to learn with your young people. Lead with kindness and fairness. Kindness is a word I use a lot in my house. I often remind my kids, you know, if you lead with kindness, you know, that's something that we take for granted and that I don't think that we are actively teaching our young people to lead with.
True.
So it's very important for me that, you know, when I hear my girls tell me things, I often ask them, were you being kind? Where was your heart with that? And a lot of things on that wheel, you know, the outcomes would be a lot differently if we just taught our young people to lead with kindness, and hopefully they grow to be adults that did the same thing.
Yeah, and I think kindness is crucial. It goes to the core of all equal and fair treatment, right? And I'm really proud to say that my son today got a golden ticket at school for being kind and nice. And I said, "Oh, what did you do?" And he said, "Oh no, nothing. It was just, you know, in general, they think that I'm that type of person." I was like, yes, I think I'm doing something right. But then on the flip side, I saw something on social media today where it's like a 9-year-old white girl who gave a speech to her school about why she wanted Black Lives Matter information, posters, statues taken down in her school. And she was so vehement about it that you can only assume that has come from the parents. So, you know, because she's 9. So she's grown up in some sort of structure where she already had that hatred and that, you know, that you know, distrust and hatred for the Black Lives Matter movement, which is crazy. So yeah, I suppose summing up, I would like to say a huge thank you to you both. It's been a really interesting discussion. I hope that, you know, whoever listens to this recording, you know, can take away some of those real practical tools and, you know, expert advice that the three of us have given tonight. And, you know, of course, you have our descriptions and our bios and our social media handles, you know, and I'm sure Rebecca and Christy Marie would be happy if anybody wants to reach out and speak to us more on any of the issues that we've talked about. If you need any more advice, I would definitely, I'm sure we'd all be more than happy to provide that, because if we all as parents can collectively work towards this goal, we are going to be moving the narrative, forward at a much quicker pace than what's happening right now. And but to end on a positive note, keep those positive affirmations going. Our kids are beautiful, regardless of their skin color or where they come from. And let's just remember to tell them every single day that they are important, and and to be kind. I think that was a really, really fundamental point as well. So thank you so much. It's now midnight in the UK, and I have to be up to take my little boy to school in the morning. So a huge thank you. And Christy and I, we've connected on LinkedIn, but Rebecca, it would be great if we did too. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for this session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, speak to you soon. Bye.